Fort de Chartres was a French fortification first built in 1720 on the east banks of the Mississippi River in present-day Illinois. The name was also applied to two successive fortifications built nearby during the 18th century in the era of French colonial control over Louisiana and the Illinois country. The very first fort was named in honor of the King of France's son, whose name was Louis de Chartres. Partial reconstruction of the third and last fort, which was built primarily from limestone shortly before the end of French rule in the Midwest, is preserved in an Illinois state park that is located about 4 miles west of Pierre du Rocher and is just south of St. Louis, Missouri. The site and its associated buildings are placed on the National Register of Historic Places and recognized as a National Historic Landmark. It is in a floodplain area known as the American Bottom. The fort's stone magazine, which survived the gradual ruin that overtook the rest of the site, is considered to be one of the oldest buildings in Illinois. Today, the state park hosts several reenactments of the forts of the colonial era civil and military life each summer. The original wooden fort was built in 1718 through 1720 by a French contingent from New Orleans. The original fort only lasted about 5 years, as it was in really bad condition because of flooding from the Mississippi. Construction of the second fort further from the river, but still in the floodplain, began in 1725. This fort was also made of logs and had a bastion at each of the 4 corners. The second fort also went into deterioration, but less rapidly, and by 1742 was in bad repair. In 1747, the French garrison moved to the region's primary settlement, 18 miles to the south at Kaskaskia. The French debated as to whether they should rebuild the fort, and when the rule of the area reverted to the French crown in the 1730s, officials began to discuss construction of a stone fortress. The government in New Orleans at the time wanted to move the garrison permanently to Kaskaskia, but the local commander argued for the location near the original site. The government decided to rebuild a fort in stone near the first forts rather than in Kaskaskia. Construction began in 1753 and was more or less completed by 1756. However, construction continued on the site for another 4 years. The limestone fort had walls 15 feet high and 3 feet thick, and enclosing an area of almost 4 acres. The stone for construction was quarried in bluffs about 2 or 3 miles away and had to be ferried across a small lake. The fort's powder magazine, as you see here, is thought to be the oldest standing building in Illinois. In 1913, the state of Illinois acquired the property and restored the powder magazine in 1917. Following the 7 Years' War, the French transferred control of Illinois country to Great Britain. The stone fort has served as the center of French administration of the region for only 10 years. With the Royal Proclamation of 1763, the British Crown declared almost all of the land between the Appalachian Mountains and the Mississippi River from Florida to Newfoundland an Indian reserve. And as we had learned in The World, the Flesh, and the Devil by Patricia Clary, that many of the French settlers then were either ordered to leave or to get a special license to remain. And many French settlers moved to the then French St. Louis, unbeknownst to them that the Spanish had actually acquired the region of St. Louis. It would not be until about October of 1765 that the British actually took control of the fort and the surrounding area. The building across the way, constructed in 1922, is a combination of a museum and office building. And within this building, it houses, showcases the French life at Fort de Chartres way back when. Also on the grounds are an operating bake oven, a garden shed built of upright logs in the French colonial post on stilts type construction, and a kitchen garden with raised beds of produce typically of the French 18th century Illinois. The original purpose of the fort was to be the seat of government and to control the Indians of the region, particularly the Fox. The original fort was a palisade of logs with two bastions at opposite corners. The large stone guards, reconstructed in 1936, contains a Catholic chapel furnished in the style of the 1750s, along with a priest's room, a gunner's room, an officer of the day room, and a guard's room. The Mississippi continued to take its toll on this fort, and it was eventually abandoned. In 1772, the south wall and bastion fell into the river. The remaining walls deteriorated. Many of the residents carted away stones for construction over the years, and by the 1900s the walls were all gone. The only part of the original fort that remained was the stone building that had served as the powder magazine. In the late 1920s and through the 1930s, it was the rest of the building and the gateway and the two stone buildings were rebuilt. In 1989, partial reconstruction of the fort's walls on the original foundation took place. The frames of some additional buildings were erected as a display of the posts and beams construction techniques used for the originals. The other buildings, fortifications, and cellars were exposed for educational purposes as we see them here today. Today, the site also has a museum, like I mentioned, has a museum and a small gift shop. And each June, to a rendezvous that is said to be one of the largest and oldest in the country, celebrating frontier French and Indian culture. Today, modern levees protect the structure, but the Mississippi River still gives a quiver to the site once in a while. In 1993, the floods breached the levee and sent waters 15 feet to lap at the top of the walls. Thank you for joining me on this quick down and dirty tour of Fort de Chartres, and looking forward to seeing some more colonial forts in and around Missouri and Illinois in the near future.